Hey, brothers and sisters, welcome back to another episode of Jesus Christ and His Second Coming. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm excited to be here with you today. It's kind of an interesting topic. Some may not find this topic quite as interesting as others, especially depending on what sect of Christianity you align with. Some of you might still find this interesting regardless, but something caught my eye or my attention lately that I wanted to talk about a little bit and just share some I guess just some additional context maybe. I'm not here to help or decide for you one way or another on what to believe or how to believe. I just simply want to provide more context. I don't quite necessarily consider myself a professional scholar, but I do study the gospel of Jesus Christ all the time. I read through my scriptures daily, go to church every Sunday, and have just tried to learn through my own personal experiences and study. So with that in mind, please, whatever I say, just understand that I am not saying this as a professional scholar. I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but that does not make me an official spokesperson for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I do not represent their official policies or stances on many different things, both religiously and administratively. So anything that I say in this episode or on my channel in general are always just my personal opinion, my interpretation, my understanding. And so just make sure that I want to am clear in distinguishing that I do not represent and I am not speaking for and in behalf of the church as a whole. These are just my experiences and my understanding. Depending on where you get your news and what sort of information they pick up on, some of you may have seen in the news recently a couple of news articles pertaining to the sale of land in Missouri. Um, Now, I personally actually live within a minute and a half of where a large chunk of this land was sold. The church historically has owned thousands of acres. In fact, we'll see here in this one article from Fox News that the church has owned roughly 4,200 acres of land, roughly 10% of the city of Lee Summit, which is where I live. I live in the city of Lee Summit. My mailing address is in the city of Lee Summit. Um, and so this land here, if we look at this map or diagram here on the left-hand side of the screen, it shows all these plots of land, but this is actually a small portion of a larger segment of what the church has owned. And they recently decided to sell it. And there's not really been any kind of reasoning behind why the church has all of a sudden now decided to sell it. I do have a friend of mine who is in the PR department locally here for the church. I reached out to them for any insight. They said, unfortunately, they didn't know that it was being sold. It just got sold, and they haven't really been provided any insight as to why the church has decided to sell this chunk of land. And not only that, but then I also started seeing then, nope, not there. Another YouTuber also put up this video about moving to Missouri, and this is kind of something that people have kind of wondered about: is the sale of land having anything to do with the Saints moving to Missouri? And for those who are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints may wonder what that means or why that is. First and foremost, you have to understand is that Kansas City, Missouri has a metropolitan area or a suburb area called Independence. And back in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, the church membership initially tried to settle some of its members here in this area because of persecutions further east where they were living back in Illinois and in Ohio. And so the Saints, in trying to flee persecution, moved westward up to Independence, Missouri. Now, at the time, Independence was really the edge of the frontier. There was kind of an unofficial line here that if once you went past Independence, you were literally in the wilderness. And so the Saints kind of butted up against this edge, hoping to get some refuge, if you will, from being persecuted for simply having their religious freedoms, which is the fundamental premise of the United States of America. Keep in mind, though, that the United States was only formed about 60 years earlier in 1776. We're now in the 1830s. So still there's a lot of things that have to be worked out, and unfortunately not everybody's fully respected the belief of freedom of religion. And there's many reasons why. And if that's a topic of interest, comment below, let me know. We can do a deeper dive on that for anybody that is unfamiliar with that aspect of both U.S. history and the history of the LDS Church. By all means, comment below if that's something you'd like to learn more. I say that because I do get a lot of people that visit this channel who are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I welcome you. I'm glad you're here. Please stay. And I love to hear your inputs and your thoughts and your questions. There's another individual on YouTube, I don't have their channel pulled up, called Hello Saints. And he's a evangelical pastor who, up until recently, has lived in St. Louis, Missouri. He just on his YouTube channel this week put out an episode where apparently he's decided for him and his family to move to Utah and to work with evangelical Christians out in Utah. And he's done a great job of uh, exploring the LDS Church from the outside perspective of an evangelical Christian. And so he's a great one if you're an evangelical Christian, or you're just simply not a member of the LDS Church but of other Christian sects, you want to hear his perspective. I highly recommend you check him out. There's a second YouTube channel also called 52 Churches in 52 Weeks. He's had a few experiences as a non-LDS member exploring the church and having his experiences. I would encourage you to check out his channel, neither of which I have really any direct or personal affiliations with. I've just watched their stuff, and I think it's wonderful to see that willingness to investigate without a lot of initial prejudices or animosity. And it's really been helpful to see and also learn from their perspectives as an LDS my whole life, from their perspective, what they think about the church and questions and things that don't make sense. So sorry for getting off on that tangent, but just kind of wanted to throw those other two sources out there. But going back to this point here is Independence, Missouri, butts right up to the north end of Lee's Summit. In fact, this plot of land that they're talking about being for sale is right down through here in between these lakes. Over here on the right-hand side, you have Lake Jocomo and Lake Blue Springs, and then you've got the smaller residential lake area. And so this plot of land is all this green space that you see here and in here. And again, like I said, I live right at the north edge of this land. In fact, we drive through this land to get to church and to go to grocery shopping. And we drive through this land all the time. We love it. In fact, it was interesting. There was, in fact, if you go back to the Fox News, let me pull that back up here. Give me just a second. Now, I'm viewing this in read-only mode because when I was trying to pull this up between ads popping up, I know they're annoying, right? And ad blockers and everything else, I was having a hard time being able to get to see all of the content. But if you go to like the Fox 4KC one, I'll drop a link to it. They've got a video at the top where they actually do a news broadcast talking about this segment. And it was fun because one of the people they interviewed, a member of the community in downtown Lee Summit, shared that while the positives to this is increase in jobs and increase in housing, the downside is there's a lot of this natural land that still has a lot of deer and birds and wildlife on it that a lot of people really enjoy. So I want to kind of pivot from this point forward to say, if you've seen this, maybe you've got some questions about it, or you've seen the YouTube comment videos that talk about moving to Missouri, which is a good video. I highly encourage you to watch it. And I do have some comments and feedback for Jared at Christian Homestead. So Jared, if you're watching this, I live right in this area, and I watched this video. I thought it was great. Got some interesting or some personal experiences with it. And one of the things that Jared talks about in this video is this notion that a lot of saints, or that as part of the second coming, there's going to be a mass migration of saints back to Missouri. And that's actually a myth. It's not something that is factual. And there's many articles and general conference talks and comments from our church leadership that says that's not happening. Jared actually goes over many of those and shares those resources. So if you want to hear what and see what those are, feel free to check out his video. He's got that information available for you. I will pull up some of what he's talked about on my own here in just a second. And one of the other things that he talked about that kind of spawned this is somebody mentioned to him about having a lot of Polynesians moving to Independence area, or just outside of Adam-and-Diamond, which is about an hour and a half north of us, that area here. And is that somehow a sign of the second coming and the gathering of the saints here? And part of the question was, well, is there really a lot of Polynesian families in this area? So in regards to one of the locations he references called Trenton, which is north of us. When I say us, those living in Jackson County, that's an area north, slightly east of us, which is also slightly east of Adam-and-Diamond. I'm unfamiliar with the membership up in that area. Jared had some comments in the video from people that live in the area that say that there is a small branch up there. If you know of anybody that lives in that community, comment below with what you understand about the size of the Polynesian community specifically. But I will say that here in Independence, there is actually quite a bit of Polynesian influence in and around. In fact, not this past 4th of July of 2020. What year are we in? 2023. Last July, 2022. Historically, there's always been, for the 4th of July holiday, there's been an independence celebration that has taken place at the stake building, which sits right next to the Visitor Center in Independence, Missouri, that has shown where people have come and celebrated, and the church has partnered with the local community to host a celebration event. And then the evening, they host one of the best fireworks shows in the area for the 4th of July. So if you ever come out to Missouri for the 4th of July, you'll want to check out the event, the festival that's usually in Independence has been pretty good. 2 years ago, or a year ago, when they did the event, they had pretty much a big portion of the entertainment was Polynesian themed. They had different locals from who live in the area who represented different Polynesian tribes and histories. We had people from Tonga, from Samoa, from New Zealand. They got up and did different cultural dances and presentations and sung, in representative of their culture and of their history. It was very beautiful. There was a lot of people. Some of the individuals that participated are actually in my own ward. I see them on Sunday. A lot of them also come from the local Independence stake, which is just north of the boundaries of where we live. And so Independence is its own stake and is separate from the Kansas City stake, which is where I fall inside of. And so, but it was beautiful. It was great to see a lot of Polynesian influence. I actually did my high school years in Provo, Utah, in which I had a lot of interaction with a lot of Polynesians in and around there. I've got an aunt and uncle who have a strong tie to the Polynesian community. My aunt and actually my cousin, her daughter, both served their missions in Hawaii. Her husband, my uncle, he served his mission in the Cook Islands. And so, I've been around the Polynesian culture a lot over the years. Beautiful culture, love the people. They're already here. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's come as any sort of mass migration, and I wouldn't use that as any sort of initial indication of thinking, oh, I've got to move to Missouri because, we've got a large influx of a particular group moving to this area. Now, what I will say is that, so we moved here in November 2019, and we moved here from Columbus, Ohio. So I also have, spent years in Ohio and been around the church history sites up there and have been amongst the saints in Ohio. But what's interesting is that, so we moved here in November of 2019, and our experience of moving here simply was because we've got a lot of family in the mountain corridor, what I call the mountain corridor. So Utah, Idaho, Montana, Arizona. Both my wife and I have a lot of family in that area. And we wanted to move closer. We just didn't necessarily want to live in the mountain corridor. As a kid, I used to live in Kansas City. And so I knew of the area and told my wife, I said, this is a great place to move. It still keeps us in the Midwest. And so we took that opportunity to move, but it wasn't necessarily anything that was like a big, strong thought that popped into our mind that says, hey, you need to now pack up and move. We just were at a point professionally and with some things going on within our family, we wanted to be closer to family. And so we use that as an opportunity to move. And that's our experience of moving to Missouri. Okay. We didn't get a call from church leadership. We didn't get a strong prompting or a dream in the middle of the night, but that was our inspiration to move. Now, by contrast, I had in the years that we've been here, so we moved in November of 2019. In the years that we've been here, we've had multiple people, in fact, more people than I've got fingers right now that I can use to count with, who have moved into our ward or moved into our stake or have moved into the area, the general area, that when I've talked to them have all said at various times they've had strong feelings to move to Missouri. Some have moved up into Jackson County. Some have moved north of Jackson County, closer to Adamant. And there's even some that have moved south down towards Lake of the Ozarks. We've got some good friends of ours that they live here. They've got a property down in Lake of the Ozarks that they attend and visit very regularly. And they've attended the branch down in there, and they have shared experiences where they've had members in that branch all of a sudden feel like they need to move to Missouri. And I want to clarify that that's really kind of the expectation about saints moving to Missouri. That's how it's going to happen. So anybody that's thinking that they're waiting for the prophet to get up to the pulpit during General Conference, which, by the way, is happening 1 month from now, that the prophet's going to get up to the pulpit and say, hey, we need all of you to move to Missouri. It's just not going to happen. Okay. In fact, let me use this now to dive over. There's an article here that came out in the April 1979 Ensign. And I want to provide a little bit of context for you to understand of that when this is a church published magazine, meaning that because it's church published, anything that gets put in here goes through a review process beforehand to making sure that the content and information is in line with church doctrine, church policy. This isn't something that is just written secretly and stashed in, and the prophet and other church leadership are unaware. Okay, it goes through a review process. So what we're seeing here is approved stance and opinion from church leadership, and this is back in 1979. And I want to provide this context of being from 1979 because part of what's also for me set off this particular topic is a friend of mine sent me something where some opinion was stated about what it's going to be like in the future that predates this by several years, several years. So, but I want to provide this first and foremost as the most current information we have, and I know it's 1979, and it's been a few years since 1979. But this is the latest that we have officially from the church, and this is titled Missouri Myths. Yes, I Freudian slip and said misery, and that's the running joke, right? A lot of times I tell people I live in the state of misery, but only when it's really humid. Yeah, so Missouri Myths. This is from a guy named Graham W. Doxey, and we can look up and learn about Brother Doxey if we really want to know. But he addresses three main myths that a lot of saints share. And I'm going to read some of this here. In fact, I'm going to just jump down to number 2, which is the entire church will be gathered to Missouri. So Missouri Myths, April 1979. This is from the Ensign. And quote number 2, or myth number 2, sorry, he says the entire church will be gathered to Missouri. Here, recent prophets have been quite specific. President Spencer W. Kimball in October Conference 1978 said, quote, "We are building up the strength of Zion, her cords and strengths throughout the world. Therefore, we counsel our people to remain in their native lands and gather out the elect of God and teach them the ways of the Lord. The temples are being built and the saints will be blessed wherever they live in all the world." And since this Ensign article, there have been other talks, even within the last 5 years, from church leadership reaffirming this sentiment. There is not going to be a mass migration or call of the church all collectively here to Missouri. It's a myth that that's going to happen. Here's from 1979. And again, there are multiple more recent talks that have encouraged the saints to please build up the church where you are at, and that the lands that you live in are other lands. Those are the cords and those are the stakes that build up the greater Zion. Okay. And there's more to this. I'm not going to jump into it. If you want to read it, I'll drop a link to this in the description of the video. Feel free to come and read it. But now I want to come to myth number 3. And before I read myth number 3, well, I'll read the title to it. So it says, myth number 3, won't there be immense destruction in Missouri preceding the second coming? So extensive that not a yellow dog will be left to wag his tail. Some of you may have heard this before. For those of you who haven't, this is an early kind of quote or extract. Before I read through this, I actually want to jump to another source. And this is the one that really kind of for me was the kickoff of this particular topic, because a friend of mine sent this to me last week. Right around that same time was when the news went out about all the land being sold in Missouri. And I saw a lot of people comment on it on Facebook. In fact, that's how I first saw it, is somebody shared one of the articles on Facebook. There was a lot of talk about, what does this mean for the saints? And then there was a lot of people who were commenting who were not members of the church, who were talking about, their feelings towards the church, one, owning all this land, two, selling the land. What's it going to do to the local environment and the economy? But it was an interesting sentiment that this particular reference. I don't know exactly where this is from. I asked where they got this from, but I didn't get an answer just yet. I want to say this probably came out of an institute manual or a study manual. And it's in reference to a section of future prophecy in D&C 101, verse 18. In fact, let's pull that up real quickly here and read through that. And anybody, whether you're a member of the church or not, have ever wanted to read the different books of scripture that we read in addition to the Bible, they're free right here. You don't even have to log in to get to them. churchofjesuschrist.org. You go up to libraries and scriptures, and you can find this information. Again, by all means, I encourage you to check it out. If you've never read any of our books before, I highly recommend you start with the Book of Mormon. because that's really a lot of the premise that's tied to our history, and in part where we get the nickname the Mormons is because of the title of this book. Again, not getting into that tangent, but if you've never read it, check it out before. If you speak another language or you know somebody who speaks another language, we've got it translated into like 160 plus languages, maybe more. So there's not very many languages left on the planet that don't have the ability to read it in their native tongue, which is wonderful. All right, Doctrine and Covenants, section 101. And I'm going to actually back up a couple of verses before we get to verse 18. We're going to start in verse 16. Therefore, let your hearts be comforted concerning Zion. And the reason I'm starting here is because this provides context to this upcoming verse and the information that the friend of mine shared with me. For those unfamiliar with the history of the church, real quickly, the church was founded in upstate New York. Membership started to grow. It moved down into Ohio. Membership continued to grow. Members started moving out west to Independence, Missouri. Membership started to grow. Along the way, both in New York and Ohio and in Missouri, a lot of the locals did not like the Saints coming in for many reasons. Some of it politically, because you now have a major influx of citizens that believe differently than the rest of the community, that presents a political threat. And makes people nervous when you have such an influx of quote unquote foreigners, or in this case, religious foreigners, especially when it's a brand new religion. There's just not a lot known. And so at the time, a couple of things were happening. Part of the reason why the Saints were coming to Missouri is because of modern revelation telling the saints that this is the center place of Zion in the future. When the Savior returns, he is building up his kingdom on the earth, and there will be the original Jerusalem that will be restored and be built up and will be one of the headquarters of his church globally. But there is a second headquarters that will be built here in the Jackson County area in what is referred to as New Jerusalem. And it's a very common term in the LDS theology is New Jerusalem, and it's that building up of another headquarters. And the saints initially tried to build New Jerusalem, and for both a combination of political strife, they were ran out, but two, there was certain spiritual laws that the Lord wanted the saints to be living before they were prepared and ready to fully build New Jerusalem. And unfortunately, at the time, the saints were not prepared. They were not willing and able to get to this point to live the life a certain way that would enable them to go and successfully build the city. And so as a result, the Lord allowed them to be driven out. And part of what happened then is this follow-up section where the Lord talks about kind of a coming back when the saints are ready to now regain this land, especially for the fact that they were legally, they had their legal rights according to the laws of the United States violated. A lot of saints had legally bought the land, and then the local government came in and ran them off the land and then seized the land and stole the land from them without financially paying for that land back to the saints. And so there is this kind of outstanding debt, if you will, with the state of Missouri of restoring the saints back to proper ownership of this land that was stolen from these early citizens. And so that's what the context of this section is talking about. And so when the Lord says, let your hearts be comforted concerning Zion, it's because a lot of saints were devastated as a result of being driven out and lost and not being able to build up this community and this society that they believed heavily. And we still do believe that this community it is for the greater good for humanity and will serve a very beautiful and enjoyable way of living. So the Lord responds saying, let your hearts be comforted concerning Zion. And for us Latter-day Saints, pause for a second and keep that in mind. The Lord understands our pain and anguish and the suffering that we've been through, and to know that it's okay. He's got it under control. He's got it in his hands. Continuing on, for all flesh is mine. Hands, be still and know that I am God. Okay, so he issues this sentiment of peace. Verse 17, Zion shall not be moved out of her place, notwithstanding her children are scattered. So Zion is still here, even though a lot of the saints in the early days have been scattered. And we have slowly been seeing more saints slowly, of their own volition and own promptings, slowly starting to move back into the area. Verse 18, they that remain are pure in heart, and they shall return and come to their inheritances. They and their children with songs of everlasting joy. to build up the waste places of Zion. Now, this is the sentiment here is the waste places of Zion. And this is where this ties into kind of another myth about Missouri, is that in order for the saints to regain, and part of the future prophecy of regaining Zion is that we will be building up a waste place. Well, you drive around right now, this is not what would be considered a waste place. There is infrastructure, there is society, there is commerce, there is a housing, there is a whole full-blown society living here in this area. And so what then a lot of saints unfortunately have misunderstood or have then thought is going, okay, well, we still have to build this new Jerusalem in the second coming, which means there has to be a future destruction coming to kind of level out or lay this place to waste. But that there is a future destruction coming to this area. What that destruction looks like, how it's executed, don't know. Never communicated, right? One of the many theories is because this area is viciously known for tornadoes, could be tornadoes. Earthquakes, combination, don't know. Okay. Verses 16, 17, and 18. Therefore, let your hearts be comforted concerning Zion, for all flesh is in mine hands. Be still and know that I am God. Zion shall not be moved out of her place, notwithstanding her children are scattered. Verse 18, they that remain are pure in heart, they shall return and come to their inheritance, they and their children, with songs of everlasting joy, to build up the waste places of Zion. Now, where some of this kind of, again, future destruction theory comes to mind is then centered around this that I left on the screen, but I'm going to go back to it now, is from a manual that references some information from Orson Hyde. It's important to understand that, since Orson Hyde, we've had modern revelation and some other information that maybe kind of challenges some of this sentiment. And again, some of it comes after the fact, and I think that that's important to understand. But let me read through this real quickly. It says waste means wild and uninhabited. And for a long time, that was Jackson County because, again, it was the frontier before the rest of the West was explored. In fact, a little thing to think about, whether you remember the church or not, is that when the saints finally got to the bottom of the barrel, if you will, from being persecuted and seeking religious freedom, true religious freedom that should have been afforded to them in the current confines of the United States of America, was not being afforded to them. They've actually fled the country. A lot of people go, no, they went out west to Utah. Right. At the time, the state of Utah did not exist. That was considered the western frontier. That land was not owned by the United States at the time the saints left, because the United States ended pretty much at Jackson County at that point in time. And again, that's part of U.S. history, part of the history of this area. If that's of interest, let me know. Comment below, maybe we'll talk about it. But because it was the early times, it was wild and uninhabited. Continuing on in this article, Elder Orson Hyde taught, the scripture says in the last days his people will go forth and build up the waste places of Zion. So he's quoting what we just read out of D&C 101. But they must first be made desolate before they can be called the waste places of Zion. Then the hands of the saints will be required to build them up. Elder Orson Pratt taught that the saints would go back to Missouri and possess the properties they had once inhabited in the early days of the church, after God's judgments have made the cities desolate. Quote, now that order of things will continue and will spread forth from the nucleus of Jackson County and western counties of Missouri and the eastern counties of Kansas, where this people will be located. It will spread abroad for hundreds and hundreds of miles to the right and the left, east, west, north, and south from the great central city, and all the people will be required to execute the law in all their stewardships, and then will there be a oneness and a union which will continue, and it will spread wider and wider and become greater and greater until the desolate cities of the Gentiles will be inhabited by the saints. So this is part of where the belief is that a future desolation is coming, because this is talked about afterwards. Now, what I want to share, and again, I'm not here to make the decision for you. Take this for what it's worth. Interpret it how you will. But I do want to go back to this notion that Christian Homestead, he actually reviewed this same Missouri Myths article as well. And he referenced it. It's about the 17-minute and 40-second mark. He starts by reading an account from a brother called B.H. Roberts, who shares a conversation with a military leader right after the Civil War. And this military leader shared his perspective of what the land looked like during the Civil War, and that the land was desolate. Homes were destroyed. The lands looked barren, desolate. I didn't fully understand this, how this played into context. But apparently, and this is what is referenced in B.H. Roberts, there was, at the time of the Civil War, there was actually what's known as General Order Number 11. Let me zoom in here a little bit on this, and it looks like it's still showing up, which is good. So this took place in 1863, August 25th of 1863. It affected Jackson County, which is what we live in now, Cass County, Bates County, Northern Vernon counties, excluding non-rural areas. And the persons affected, all citizens who could not prove their loyalty to the Union, issued by Brigadier General Thomas Ewing Jr., commander of the District of the Border. Result, much of northwestern Missouri emptied of its population, property was confiscated, and becomes known as the Burnt District. So, General Order Number 11, during the height of the Civil War, 1863, this is going on in Missouri, and I'll admit I had a little bit of ignorance to the Civil War. When I hear Civil War, I always assume out east, out through Pennsylvania, Virginia, through that Ohio, throughout that eastern region of the United States. I never really think of it stretching all this way out to Missouri, but it did. So you learn something new every day, which is this is the point, is let's learn. Here's a little excerpt here. From Order Number 11, all persons living in Jackson, Cass, Bates counties, Missouri, and in that part of Vernon, included in this district, except those living within 1 mile of the limits of Independence, Hickman's Mills, Pleasant Hill, and Harrisonville, and except those in part of Caw Township, Jackson County North, are ordered to remove from their present places of residence within 15 days. So a lot of citizens were ordered out of their home, off their property. The property was confiscated, okay, and a lot of it was burned down. A lot of the homes were destroyed. And you want to see and hear more of this context, I highly recommend checking out this video here, Missouri Myths 2 of 3, talking specifically about the destructions of Missouri preceding the Second Coming. I'm going to come back now to this actually in the article itself from the Ensign. So myth number 3, won't there be an extensive destruction? And it goes on to say, it is true that destruction throughout the earth is one of the conditions prior to the Second Coming. Yet, as far as destruction in Missouri is concerned, there are two schools of thought among the members. One believes it's already taken place, and this goes back to what I just read from Order Number 11. Elder B.H. Roberts published a reported prophecy of Joseph Smith to Alexander Donovan, his lawyer in Missouri. According to Donovan's brother-in-law, writing the incident over 70 years after it occurred, and this I think does play some significance, is that this was recorded 70 years later. I don't know about you, but I would expect my mind to be a little fuzzy on the details 70 years later. Warn Donovan that God's wrath hangs over Jackson County. You'll live to see the day when it will be visited by fire and sword. Fields, farms, and houses will be destroyed, and only the chimneys will be left to mark the desolations. Now, what did we just read about in Order 11? Becomes known as the Burnt District. And if I tried to pull up the actual information that is quoted, that is read here. Jared from Christian Homestead did provide links, but when I tried to use those links, they didn't work for me. So unfortunately, I couldn't pull up the information. But notice here, chimneys will be left to mark the desolation. Fields, farms, and houses will be destroyed. Order 11, population driven out, property confiscated, burned district. Okay. And there was some of this information, and one of the quotes from that B.H. Roberts put in there from the military individual was that that's all he saw, was when he would go through the areas, that all that was left was the chimneys of the houses. And the reason being is because at that point in time, the chimneys had been moved from the inside of the house to the outside of the house. And so the rest of the house burned down, leaving just the chimney structure behind. Continuing on in the article, quote, General Donovan said to me, his brother-in-law continued that the devastation of Jackson County during the Civil War forcibly reminded him of this remarkable prediction. Elder Roberts cites additional descriptions of Jackson County's role during the Civil War as fulfillment of this prophecy. So this is theory one, or idea number one, is that this has already been fulfilled as a result of devastation and destruction from the Civil War. I shared you the information from General Order Number 11. Again, I'm not here to make the decision for you, but if you're on the fence, I would consider this a very strong narrative that this is going to take place. The other school of thought on the so-called yellow dog prophecy is that some members feel that it is yet to occur, and this kind of comes in line with the sentiment from from a friend of mine, which is the reason why he shared that quote from Orson Pratt. Was it Pratt or Orson Hyde? Did I get that wrong? Whoops, sorry. Where did I have that? Orson Hyde, sorry, from Orson Hyde, is that it's yet to occur. However, a study of the supposed source of the prophecy is helpful. It seems to have originated in conversation between Heber C. Kimball and a woman named Amanda Wilcox in Salt Lake City in May of 1868. She reports him as saying, meaning President Kimball, the western boundaries of the state of Missouri will be swept so clean of its inhabitants that, as President Young tells, now Kimball is now quoting Brigham Young, because this original yellow dog quote actually came from Brigham Young himself. So sorry for the confusion, but Kimball is quoting Young that when we return to that place, there will not be left so much as a yellow dog to wag his tail. The Ensign article goes on to say there seem to be a number of questions about the authenticity of this account since, one, Heber C. Kimball was in Provo, not in Salt Lake, during the month of May. So if she had this conversation with President Kimball in May of 1868, kind of hard to do if he's not there. Two, no other record exists of Brigham Young, who made this yellow dog statement, making a similar statement. So essentially what they're alluding to is that this, if it was said, was a one-off statement, and Brigham Young doesn't show any evidences of ever sharing that sentiment in any other context. He never repeated himself. Doesn't necessarily mean it's not true, didn't happen, but a lot of times when we look back historically and something only happens once, it's kind of hard to wonder, and it allows a little bit of room for kind of questioning its legitimacy. However, it is sufficiently similar to Joseph Smith's statements, except for the yellow dog sentiment, that someone may have remembered the original substance, but in retelling allowed embellishments to creep in. Okay. So there's a little bit of question about this second sentiment. Again, the timing of it, who said to who, where they were actually at the time. Keep in mind that this first idea takes place in the Civil War, during the Civil War era, 1863, a little later. Whereas if we go back to the or if we go back to this article here, they're quoting Elder Hyde. I don't know the date. So Journal of Discourses, we'd have to go look this up to know the date of when this was said. But my assumption here is that this was said kind of prior to that sentiment. And again, I'm going to second it for the simple fact that this is from a 1979 article, meaning the church has reviewed this opinion. And as of 1979, this was kind of the stance that they're taking, is that there's this other perspective from the yellow dog theory. It's a little hard to validate. The church doesn't seem to fully support it as much as they do from the B.H. Roberts sentiment. Finishing the article. The above are only three of the myths associated with Missouri's prophetic future. Why did they arise? One reason may be that early church members, disappointed in their efforts and suffering from their wrongs, welcome statements describing their future success in Missouri. Another may be the word of mouth method of transmitting much information. The early church fostered the establishment of casual and possibly incorrect heard remarks as doctrine. And I'll tell you, this isn't the only instance where we've known that to happen in the church. Right? This is the old game of telephone. You pass it down line and things just get heard and adjusted over time. Some of it, most of the time not meant to be malicious in nature or intent to change it. It just naturally happens, right? So something to kind of think about when you're considering kind of which of these two. I'll add this kind of as my last closing sentiment to this nature. To me personally, I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen or that this is the reason why it wouldn't happen, but there's been, one, we have the temple in Kansas City, which is just north of us here. Now, I will say this. I do also want to comment real quickly this is more specifically to Jared at Christian Homestead. Jared, if you're watching this, you asked the question about Adam and Diamond, about a temple being up there. And what's interesting, at least when I looked at it on my phone, you asked about a temple right here. So actually, if you do Adam and Diamond temple, it puts this notion right here. It for whatever reason, the map labels it as a temple. I pulled it up. I'm an Apple user, and I pulled it up on Apple Maps, and Apple Maps actually labeled it, actually showed the icon, and it said temple at Adam and Diamond. And our stake patriarch has told me on multiple occasions that Adam and Diamond actually is a temple. It's just doesn't have the traditional structure that we're used to saying. And so, if you're ever wanting a temple-like experience in regards to being close to God, being at Adam and Diamond is one of those places that you can be at and have that similar type of experience. Now, we don't perform ordinances at Adam and Diamond like we do inside our temples, meaning baptisms for the dead, the initiatories, endowments, sealings. We don't do any of that as of now. As of 2023, we don't do those ordinances at Adam and Diamond, but it is still very much a sacred ground set apart as a temple. There are service missionaries up there. There are 13 pairs of service missionaries that are responsible for maintaining and beautifying the grounds. I also know that because this past summer I went up there with my mom, who has friends that are service missionaries at that at Adam and Diamond, and they took us on a beautiful tour of the grounds, and they shared with us some of their experiences with uh, taking care of and beautifying the grounds and some of the things that they've been doing. Which again reminds me, I know in my last episode I brought up if anybody be interested in me doing a live stream from Adam and Diamond to let me know. We didn't get as much response out of that. So if that's something you're still interested in doing, I need you to like the video so we can get up to a high amount of likes. I need you to share the video, and I need you to comment that you would like to see the live stream from Adam and Diamond. Okay, so make sure you do that, in the comments below. To wrap things up, I don't necessarily foresee a lot of destruction coming. There could still be some. Let me just put it that way. Could we still have a tornado that does some? Sure. Could we still have an earthquake that has some? Sure. I don't know that it's going to be as devastating as maybe what's alluded to in that article. I'm just, there's other things that kind of make me a little skeptical of that. But hey, this is up for you to decide. I'm just simply here to provide sources and information, help you kind of figure this out, ponder through it. I'll say this much, and Jared on Christian Homestead made a similar sentiment. If you feel prompted, if you feel strongly that the Lord wants you to move here to Missouri, move out here to Missouri. If you want to be shown around, get to see the area before you make any final decisions, let me know. Like I said, I live in the area. Reach out to me in the comments, or I've got an email address dropped below. Send me an email. And share that sentiment. And I realize I didn't kind of finish my final thought here about it, is that not only do we have the temple here in Kansas City, we also have the Adam and Diamond area that's been having a lot of energy and effort put into beautifying and preparing the land. We also have the visitor center in Independence. And if for anybody that's not seen that or unfamiliar, okay, we've got this facility right here, beautiful facility. So we've got the visitor center here. Let me back up. In Independence, Missouri, that has been built right here, Independence Visitor Center. Okay, this is what I was originally showing, and it was when I got to this photo here that I was talking about, not a structure of the LDS Church or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This is the Community of Christ, what I call our religious cousins. That's their building, looking straight across the street at theirs. This is looking out into the parking lot next to it. This back parking lot over on the other side of the tree line actually belongs to the stake center that's right next to the visitor center. There's this big open field here in the back. Anyways, this visitor center, something to understand about this visitor center, I'm going to see if I can find a more frontal shot here. This visitor center, going off on another topic very quickly, was actually back in David O. McKay's time, was built as a temple. We don't perform any live ordinances in it, but it was built as one of the temples meant for the future city of Zion. And so, kind of the premise I wanted to go to about the whole destruction coming in the future, it still could be. I'm not saying it couldn't. The Lord is mysterious. He works how he wants to work. I'm not going to begin to dictate for the Lord. I've also known that there's been many times and examples where the Lord has repeated the same thing. When we thought it was initially fulfilled, it's fulfilled a second time, and that's just part of the Lord reiterating his sentiment or his statements. But the sentiment is there's a lot of infrastructure being built here. It would kind of seem a little odd for the Lord to then come through and demolish and devastate the entire land when he's already been putting all this effort to build it up, to then just turn around and build again. Again, not saying that it couldn't happen, that it wouldn't happen, but I don't know. I'm not 100% sold on future destruction, devastation. There may be some to some degree. I just don't know if it's quite as vast or just devastating as kind of what's alluded to in some of the other sources that I've seen and read. So I'll let you make it up on your own, which is what you should be doing. Don't take my word for it. Read it, search it, study it. Got questions, comments about it, drop it below. Again, remember that If you've got any questions, I do have an email below. You're more than welcome to shoot me an email and communicate that way. I want to say thank you again. Please make sure you like and subscribe. Help keep this channel going and growing. And I will see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.